There we go.
Call to order the City Oversight Committee meeting of Thursday, March 9th, 2023. Two items on the agenda. The first item is the women's shelter update as well as current contract terms and date. And I'm assuming April has that ball.
That's me. So, thanks for inviting me back. You guys must have liked me a whole lot last month and just invited me right back. So I'm happy to be here to talk about this very important project. So you did receive a report from me. It looks a little bit like this. It just has some random numbers on it. At the bottom, you'll see some more in detail things about the really great things that have happened in the month of February. So numbers don't really tell a story about how things happen. They tell you the numbers of people that came through, 10 veterans, 48 women, 61 men, one person with no single gender. See the ages of stuff. You'll see that our nightly average was at or higher than capacity just because it's been so cold in the early parts of February. So we were trying to help as many people inside as possible. You'll also see that 4 people from the shelter, 4 guests from the shelter moved to permanent housing in February thanks to the case management work that we were able to do there to help those folks get into permanent housing. 5 guests started work, and we were able to help them get work clothes, the shoes they needed, those kinds of things. 2 left for long-term treatment to get into drug and alcohol treatment, so that's really great. And then 4 of our guests who had not previously been engaged at Central Oklahoma Community Mental Health Center started treatment, tackling their mental health issues. So those are some really important things that are happening that would not have been possible without having a safe and stable bed to sleep in at night. That's just a really, really critical thing. What these numbers also don't tell you is who the people are that stay at a friend's house. On our women's side alone, we have a woman in a wheelchair, 2 women with such chronic health issues that they have to walk with canes and oxygen tanks. We have a pregnant woman that stays there. We have like 4 women over the age of 65. We have some very, very young women, vulnerable women, one of which who's not even 5 foot tall. She's just a teeny tiny little thing. These are people that would be very vulnerable outside of the safety of the walls that we provide for them, that you guys provide for them. The same thing on our men's side. We've got 2 men in wheelchairs, one with a traumatic brain injury that is just so vulnerable to being outside. There's just some really significant challenges that these folks face that make them very, very vulnerable to be outside. And our goal for them is not just to keep them there forever. It's to keep them there until we find them permanent housing, the support services they need. And I think that's the goal for all people who are homeless in Norman. But the real clear truth is that is too difficult without access to emergency shelter. It's just too difficult. I've heard this term like, well, an emergency shelter is just a warehouse. We're just warehousing men and women, and that could not be furthest from the truth. There's a reason that we call a friend's house a friend's house. It's a reason that we came up with that name, and that's so when the people walk in the door, they're immediately met with love and support and care so that they can start to believe in themselves again, start to have hope again. And that's really the first step. The science of hope tells us that hope is really the first step to leaving behind big challenges like homelessness, addiction, poverty, joblessness, all of those kinds of things. There's also this other story that we're busing people into Norman to make them homeless here. And I can just tell you, I don't have any interest in making my job harder. Like, I would not invest a moment of energy in getting a new homeless person here because we have enough already. I want to help those folks already. The people that are staying at a friend's house, a significant majority of them have deep roots in Norman, have been here a long time, have family here. One of the people that stays in our shelter, his family lives in my same neighborhood. I just found that out. Another woman that stays in our shelter, she was living with her mother for the last 3 years of her life as she was struggling with cancer. She was taking care of her mother. Her mother passed away, and then the house went to trust, and her little bit of income just wasn't enough to get her rehoused. Her mother and I went to church together. I knew her mother. So these are Norman people. These are Norman people who need us to help them have an opportunity. We have not historically invested in homeless services in Norman. We have had grants come through that the city of Norman facilitated, and those are very wonderful things, and we've been very grateful for them. But the city of Norman has not historically invested in homeless services. We invest in a lot of things like golf courses, rec centers, senior centers, public art, pickleball. We invest in a lot of things, and not that those things aren't great, but those are for people who already have opportunity. And I really, really think this investment is helping people who don't, who haven't had opportunity, who really need one. And so I'm just going to jump right into my ask today. Like, I would really like to see us extend this temporary contract at the place we are, at the 109 West Gray address, until we can secure a permanent location. You guys might remember that last year you all released a request for proposals for an operator of a permanent overnight shelter. Two agencies replied to that. We were one of them, and we were chosen as kind of a let's move forward. And the plan was halted. Kind of winter came, and we switched all our energy into moving into the temporary location to just be ready for winter. But we're ready to go out and find a permanent location. So we can, at Food and Shelter, have a conversation about identifying a building, renovating it, making it into a shelter, but it's going to be in a location you do not want it in. It's going to be in downtown. It's going to be nearby because it has to be. It has to be near services. It has to be near bus routes. It has to be near grocery stores so people can eat. Or we can stay where we are until the land near Food and Shelter comes available, and we can buy that land or access that land and build a permanent overnight shelter there, so it's adjacent to the services that they need for the daytime, that case management stuff that's so important to get people off the streets, to get them into permanent housing. And so that's my request today. Does that mean you have a question?
Yeah,
Just a second. Just a second. Are you done?
Well, I wasn't, but now I don't.
No, go ahead, finish.
I was just gonna say it's.
Do you need to jump in now?
No,
April
finish.
Sorry, I didn't know
You're
the
fine.
signs. This is new to me. So it seems like a lot of money. I understand that. We invest a lot of money in other kinds of things. The alternative to this style of shelter is motels, is using motels as shelter. It will double or triple the cost to use those kinds of placements as a shelter option, and I don't think that that's a direction we want to go. I don't think it's the safest and most productive means of providing shelter. Here we're able to see them, know them, get to know their stories. I can tell you every person in here's name and almost everything about their story because we spend time with them and we get to build relationship with them. It seems like a lot of money, but every single person there is worth it. It's a really good investment. It's a really good investment to help us really start to tackle the problem of homelessness in Norman.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'll let Rashard jump in right after you answer this. Just real quick, your organization as a whole, percentage-wise, how much money is funded by government sources and how much from private sources?
I would say if we don't count this a friend's house contract, like the city of Norman, if we're just talking about HUD dollars, it's about 18%.
No other grants?
That's government grants. So we receive philanthropy like from Starkey's Foundation and those kinds of things. Those are not government grants.
Okay, but like when you get money from the city of Norman that has given to Food and Shelter, what percentage is of that? Just total, is it 18% total government dollars, or is that just counting HUD? I mean, all from whatever, when it comes from the county, when it comes from, I don't know where it all comes from, but if it's a government dollar that you get, what percentage is that?
This last year is going to be kind of an aberration because there was so much ARPA money and CARES Act money that came in. So if you were to look at 2022, it would be probably closer to 50% because, again, we had all that extra money that came in. But
Minus that year, that's totally understandable. What would, even if you don't know it off the top of your head, what would you say? Is it 30% government, the rest private? Is it 40% government, the rest private?
I would say without any COVID money, anything like that, it's roughly 18% every year is HUD federal dollars. Now this grant came in different and so I would say it probably adds another 5% on. It's not a significant, maybe a 25% total.
Okay. Rashard.
No, that was my question, so I'm gonna ask my other question. That goes
Sorry,
to,
that's not your question.
that's okay, with Mr. Pyle. The current location, is it not where Factory Obscura is planning to go or scheduled to go?
Factory Obscura's plans, they went out and did a lot of legwork in their initial efforts to generate local investment in that project. And they said they're a little early, so they're not ready yet. We stay in constant contact. It may be another year or two before we're back in conversation with the folks at Factory Obscura. So
Okay.
they are not an immediate pressure on that facility.
Okay, thank you. That's it for now.
Yes, ma'am.
What types of services come to visit y'all, and how many times a week do they visit?
So at the night shelter, it's limited on the outside people that come in. We have partnerships with Central Oklahoma Community Mental Health, so they come and do outreach there, and the VA does outreach there.
And they come weekly, twice a week, 3 times a week?
Central Oklahoma is there weekly, and the VA comes once a week. Yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned permanent, when we think about permanent shelters and things like that. From your location, which side of that is where you want to buy that property?
So if I were dreaming, and I do know that this is dreaming for right now, the best I would like to see it south of Food and Shelter.
Okay.
So we have the cottages, the share center. South would be a big empty field right now. So
Creek
it's
runs
and the creek runs behind it. Yeah.
That makes sense. Any kind of inklings from anybody, horn blowing, anything that's ever going to become a reality, or?
Well, I think it would easily become a reality if the land were available. I know that probably 3 months ago or so, I was in a meeting with the city manager. I think Helen, you were there. Sorry, Councilmember Grant, you were there, and there was some talk about the state only wanting to sell that land to one buyer, and maybe there were multiple entities coming together to look into buying that. That's the last I've heard about whether that land's going to be available or not. But yeah, that would be.
What does that facility look like in your mind? If your dream was there, what would you have?
So I would probably model my dream facility after the City Care Shelter in Oklahoma City. It's a men's dorm and a women's dorm with a series of family units kind of in between. In fact, the bunk beds that we bought are the exact same bunks they use because they have had such great quality there. They also have space to kennel animals, which is a big challenge for us to get people inside right now. Is they want to come inside, they want to access services, but they don't want to leave their animal in the cold, which I understand.
There's where you get me.
But yeah, it's a really neat space. It's built very industrial, so it's gonna be hard to damage and that kind of stuff. But that's what I'd really like to see. I don't know that we need to have all day services there, especially if we were going to build right near the day shelter, Food and Shelter, so they could everything's accessible in one location. But yeah, that would be my dream.
Thank you.
Yes,
May I have
ma'am.
the sheet in front of you there? My iPad is not working.
Sure. So ignore my scribbles on the bottom.
Councilman-
All it says is today alone, I paid the deposit and application fee for 2 of our shelter residents to move into permanent housing.
I just want to see the numbers you were talking about when we started the presentation.
Okay.
You recognize me. So how the ask is to continue to keep the shelter open, and at what, I guess we've got an idea about, building a permanent shelter in the future. I'm on board with providing a permanent location for that. But how long are we thinking, and would this contract come back to us we extend it for several months and then we come back and reappropriate, or is it, what is your ask, and how we're gonna do that moving forward?
So I don't even know what's possible. So ideally, months at a time as opposed to month to month would be better. That's a lot of work. My question would be, is there any movement on the land over at Griffin campus? Is that gonna come, or should we leave that dream behind?
Yeah, we're hearing efforts on the state's part. They're advancing a couple of architectural efforts on 2 different sites for their new hospital.
Right.
And so we think all those things are in progress as we speak. In terms of the folks participating, obviously when the weather is bad, we're at capacity, bumping up against it every single night. The concept of month to month is great. April probably does need some runway in terms of contracts with the security provider that she has. They probably like to know at least 30 days in advance so they know where they're going to move staffing.
For sure.
But I mean, this is an opportunity. Our current agreement said through March 31st, and historically, when the city operated it back in 2019, 2020, it was the thought was that it'll warm up by the end of March, and the emergency part won't be there. If there are parameters, council wants to, when you say how long, you could kind of condition it any way you saw fit. If participation drops below a certain number of folks, maybe that would be your trigger to say, well, at the end of the next month, then that would be, if 10 people are showing up a night, it's an expensive exercise for 10 people.
Yeah.
But 42 people, that it makes more sense that way.
Can you walk us through how much it costs per month? I can't remember off the top of my head what the total contract was whenever we awarded it on the front end.
You're talking about the temporary one or the permanent one?
I'm talking about the temporary one to
Okay,
continue
it's
to
just-
operate.
Yeah, it's just, what you all pay us is just over $53,000. We're spending about $60,000 to $65,000 a month on it. So some of that money, food and shelter is covering out of our budget.
So 53 a month from the city.
That's, it's
Okay.
53 and some change, I don't know
Okay.
off the top of my head. One thing I would just comment about is emergency shelter is a really critical piece of the homeless service model. It's not an emergency weather crisis, it's an emergency life crisis. And that's where the emergency comes from. And there's a lot of people in this room that stay at our shelter, and I would tell you if they're still homeless in June, they're gonna wanna still have a safe bed to sleep in at night, because being homeless is dangerous.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. I don't think that it really just has to do with our severe weather events. And we know that,
April
I mean, that is
is-
also coming up. And the summer, we've had people that, the heat can be extremely deadly.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about the cold, it's also about the heat. And so I think it's really important for us to continue, personally, I think, moving this forward, whether that comes on a quarterly basis or 6 months at a time, until we can continue to have conversations about what the permanent shelter, where it's gonna be. Are there any downsides to finding another temporary location if the city needs that location for something else? Like, what is the, I guess, impact?
The impact would probably be, we would have to close down for a few days to move bunks. That's the biggest challenge, because they're big industrial sized bunks that had to take a professional to put together. So that's probably the biggest downside. We can work around that in another location, like at food and shelter, or, something like that, if we had to do that. The upside could be that we might find space that increases capacity, and we need to do that too.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Councilmember
Also agreed, because summer, I believe, right as I took office, there was a death right in Ward 4 of a homeless individual, and there were several more, and a body found on OU property. But that said, I also really appreciate the numbers on the folks that are getting housed, getting treatment, and getting work. And I feel like extending this would allow those people to continue, even if they're 10, still get a job, still move on, get that treatment. So I'm very supportive. And I would be curious to see what kind of contract we have to draft.
And we have not had the conversation with April and her team about, commencing the search for, a site that may be larger. And operating costs really don't change that dramatically if we're able to house, 15 or 20 more people in the space. It's the same number of security personnel on site and the same number of intake people. So there probably is value in doing that homework assignment to see what other spaces might be available. And we know real estate changes hands every day in the city of Norman, Oklahoma. So things that may not have been available for consideration 6 months ago may very well be available for consideration today. So we're happy to take that direction from council too, and engage with April and do that search.
That's a location kind of problem.
Absolutely.
What I'm speaking out of turn, I'm sorry.
Councilmember, you can go ahead. You want to yield to the, go ahead.
I yield to you.
All these gentlemen and
Go ahead.
Other governments seem to take notice. But you mentioned this month, or in February, 4 people found permanent housing. So since we started this overnight shelter in November, how many permanent housing people have left the shelter and gotten permanent housing since then?
I think I have my January report in here, so prior to January, we were using like just the first come, first served model, and it was just, every night was just kind of chaos. And you guys had been there, you can remember that it was just like people rushing to get in, just hoping they get a bed. And we revisited that model for a couple of reasons. One, I got a call from the city manager, got an email about the hanging out, starting it sometimes early as noon on the sidewalk there. And I asked one of the guys that was there, we don't open till 5. Why are you here at 1 o'clock? And he said, I'm so scared I won't get a bed that I just have to be here. It's the only thing I can do is wait. And I thought, boy, that's just the most unproductive use of somebody's day, is just sitting and waiting and sitting and waiting. And so, we visited as a staff and decided to change to the save bed model. And then that's really when we were able to start doing some in-depth work. And so in January it was 11, in February it was 4 more, and then like I scribbled on my notes, today 2 of our residents, we paid their deposit, their homelessness will be over in about a week.
Okay. And we know we have quite a few veterans that stay there every night.
Yeah.
At least a dozen or so, it looks like. That's a nightly throughout the month?
I would say so. I mean, the ones that I know of, they're there, pretty much. Some of them are the ones that we've gotten housed, though, through the VA and other kinds of programs. So. And
you mentioned folks that have either mobile disability, mental health issue, or a
brain injury.
Specific case of brain injury, and then pregnant is another one, and then some elderly as well. So it's pretty broad, it seems, of the diversity of different people that are staying the night.
Yeah, and I think that's really true of just the homeless population as a whole.
Sure.
I think we have an idea about who they are, this kind of image, but there are these people in the room, they're like elderly people, like I said, that people with family that go to my church.
And last month you told us that there had actually been very few problems as far as the police having to intervene or things like that. Is that still holding up this past month? Yeah, several members of our security team are here. They do a really great job of using kind of a compassionate response to things, and luckily we've had very great. Most of our emergency calls are ambulances. When you say that, where's Lisa? When you say that, most of our emergency calls are ambulances for people having health issues. Okay. Well, I would just note that we talked about how much funding the city gives out to outside agencies at the Finance Committee meeting last month, and it was noted that we've historically, or at least for the last decade or so, the $225,000 mark is roughly what the city contributes to social and voluntary services. And I think maybe Food and Shelter gets some of that allocation, perhaps.
All agencies are maxed at $10,000. Yeah,
so I just note that in our $300 million budget, that the city of Norman spends less than
just silly math,
micro percent of our city budget is spent on these types of things, and so I just, from a perspective standpoint, we don't spend very much of city resources on services like these, and so just something to keep in mind as we pursue more permanent options, which I do support as well. When that bond election happened a few years ago, that was the one that got the most support. It just barely failed. It did pass in my ward, so and by a pretty comfortable margin. So I do support finding some sort of permanent solution. I think the certainty of having a place to lay your head is, it like affects your entire day about whether you're able to function, whether you're able to look for housing, look for a job, interact with others. If you can't get a good night's sleep, and you're constantly worrying about where you're going to sleep that night, I think that's a toll that really wears quickly, I think, on folks. So, so yeah, I think you're right about emergencies, and the winter, gets a lot of. We look at that a lot because it's so cold here.
Yeah.
But really, Oklahoma weather is kind of year-round an issue. And I agree that just being in that situation is an emergency of life. But yeah, there's not really a good time in Oklahoma where it's not some issue that outside weather-related that could cause a problem for you if you're stuck in it. So I would be good with continuing this until we figure out a more long-term solution.
Councilmember Shaw.
Are you keeping stats on how many seek treatments while they're at the house?
Yeah.
Can you share the stats with us when you
How
get a
many-
moment?
Seek treatment? Like, are you talking about? Like,
So we talk about the money we spend and the percentage of money you receive from us. I think it would be beneficial for us to see, since we started this program with you last year, how many of your residents have sought treatment or in treatment today, how many have sought jobs and are currently employed today, and so forth, and housing. I'd like to see those numbers if you can provide them.
on my January and February report, those numbers are on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you send it to staff so they can send it to us? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think that should be already in your doodad somewhere.
It should be, but I have
Okay.
some IT issues here, so.
Okay, I will send it to you
If
personally.
you got my information
I
still.
will get
I
it
like
to
what
you.
you're doing. I'm a big supporter for a long time.
Yeah.
One of the issues we face when we're using taxpayer money is that I think most taxpayers would like to see results.
Sure.
They want to see what their money is being spent on and the results of what the money is being used for.
Yeah.
And so, when people talk about, Normanites are not inherently anti-spending money on homeless projects here. They just want to know that the money is well spent and they're getting results. And so if we can share that, and I can get those copies, which I have now, we can share that with our constituents, because that's the biggest issue. The driving issue is that, we talked last year, I made the comment that we need to plan, Can we hire these folks out to the city? Can we find jobs? I mean, there's a lot of, Mr. Pyle, is it a possibility that we can hire these folks to do work for the city?
Mayor
in some
Hackler and I had
capacity?
that conversation, didn't you remember?
I do.
I mean, is it a possibility we can hire some of these individuals who
Park
want to go to
cleanup,
work
yeah.
for park cleanup, storm cleanup?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to have that conversation, and we hadn't had that conversation.
There's a lot of people that I know in here that are excited about opportunity. So.
Because I think the ultimate goal is to get those who want to get off homelessness, get
Yeah.
out, get them into a stable environment, get into treatment, and get them into a paying job so they can become productive members of
Yeah.
Norman.
And that's what we're really, really good at Food and Shelter. Really good at it.
Just real quick, just maybe some clarification on what he's asking on these numbers. Like you have the snapshot, like this is what we did this month, but do you have it where you've tracked them, like if you put them in November and they had a job and a house, are you still tracking them, showing that it's this much time later and they're still hitting these marks?
We do track that stuff, yeah.
Okay, so that's the kind of numbers I would like to see, not just the cumulative, like, here's the sum for this month, like, here's where it is after this. 'Cause I'm sure that those percentages change some, but maybe is an acceptable amount, but if it's like, oh, after 4 months they dropped completely off, there's a breakdown there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
we definitely track that. So I don't have that report with me.
But is that something that, I know that probably takes some time and effort, is that, I would like to see that, the longevity
Yeah, and
over time.
yeah, and next month I can report on everybody we housed in January and tell you, where those
So-
folks
okay.
are and all that kind of stuff. So for sure.
All right, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councilmember
This
Green.
question's for Daryl, because we talked about that program. Wasn't an OKC version that we were told about?
Yes, a couple of versions, and, there's never a shortage of activity that departments, Public Works, Parks and Recreation couldn't benefit from extra hands, making the day's load a little lighter. It just comes down to the administrative function. Is there an entity that would provide the administrative service in record keeping? So that, as Councilmember Tortorella said, that, yeah, you could demonstrate to your constituents that, yes, they're not just receiving, you know, a hand out, but a hand up. And, you know, April's ability to track those folks long into their success.
Do you remember what the OKC program was called?
I know Lisa's got it, I'll get it, yes, we have it.
Okay.
But yeah, and that's information we can share, and it's so much easier to take advantage of systems that already exist because they already have record keeping and how that process works, to be able to adopt an existing program from one of our neighboring agencies. And they're just blessed in Oklahoma City. They've got a huge number of nonprofits that provide levels of service. We're just not big enough to have our own yet, so for us to be able to capitalize on their existing success story makes our lives easier in that way. So happy to put our fingers on that, share that with April and Council, and let you know how that might be implemented.
You good? I don't know which one was first. All right, Mayor.
Sticking point we found in that is having that shelter. Because if we're gonna promise somebody 3 hots and a cot for a day's work and be able to give them a little bit of cash or do something like that so they can get the incidentals that they need. The problem is that shelter. We don't have that place for enough persons, at least it seems to me, for enough persons to be able to do something good in the park other than keeping them busy. And if it were other places too, we'd have to have permission to go on private land to be able to clean up some of the places that have trash blowing on them from other places. And there's a bunch of stuff to work out, basically, is the answer to that. But to me, the sticking point is that permanent place that we can promise somebody, you did something good, you get a reward for doing that.
Yeah, incentives, yeah. I
Incentive.
think incentives work, yeah.
It does sound like there is value in consensus that an effort to be undertaken with April and the folks of Food and Shelter in the city to rejoin that quest for a large capacity facility so that we can expand the opportunities and those incentives that, you know, the benefits that come with that day's work.
There's probably enough consensus.
Ah,
I'll just be honest. I'll just be, you know where I'm at.
I just have one more question that to I guess fully understand kind of the concern and questioning of like data, right? So what are the limits of the HMIS system? Because that's typically where you're tracking people through the system. But at what point do you stop tracking? At what point do you say, okay, they are no longer part of what we need to track for HMIS?
When we
Like what are
rehouse
the requirements, I guess?
When we rehouse somebody, we have an internal policy that we follow up them every month for 6 months.
Okay.
And then if they agree, then we follow up for 6 more months. So we follow up for a full year.
Okay.
We do put some information into HMIS, like did their income change, did their benefits change, did they gain insurance, you know, things like that. But we're really looking at housing stability. And when we call, we say, you know, is your rent paid? Because we want to make sure if they're struggling, they're not alone, you know, out there. And because, you know, you don't take somebody out of homelessness and then they're magically wealthy, you know, they're going to need our relationship for the long term. And so that's kind of our thing. HMIS is limited on what it can tell you. You can't just populate out whatever you want, but we have our own internal tracking as well.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I guess, everyone to understand like the limits of what you are tracking and how far out, because there may be a drop off, but that's not due to someone not continuing to be permanently housed
Yeah,
or,
someone
you know,
just
having a
needs
job or
Yeah.
being, you know, successful. But it's just that's when the tracking requirement or whatever kind of ends. So I think it's good to have like the asterisks around this is how long we're tracking and kind of getting in contact with people. Yeah.
Any idea how many churches are in Norman?
Ooh, no, we work with about 27 churches here in Norman.
Next question.
I don't know how many churches are in Norman, but we have 27 partner churches.
I think we need to have a whole lot more.
Men. Yeah, let's get them over, yeah.
Well,
Like,
here's
I'm
my
not-
deal. I don't have anything wrong with what you're doing. I just don't like it being government money. I want it to be from those people that I feel are supposed to be doing that in the community. I don't think it's taxpayer money. That's my only problem with it ever, if y'all haven't figured that out.
And there are a lot of people that believe in that same thing too. We're very, very lucky to have so much support from the community that allows us to do this kind of thing, so.
I think we need to put a coalition together to round up the churches in this town. Think how many ever there are. If they gave a couple $100 a piece, some of them could do 1,000 a month without blinking an eye. That would add up in a hurry.
It sure does, yeah, it sure does.
And that's where it should be coming from.
Sunday before last, the First Presbyterian Church hosted a summit on homelessness, and some of us were invited to come and talk. And a woman stood up and said, "Do you know, if every person in this town gave $10, we could end this problem today?" And I was like, that's really simple math. But yeah, if we all did our part, it would, yeah.
I'll go with you.
It could go a long way, yeah.
I bet you we can put together a directory. We'll have access to that. We'll figure out exactly how many we have.
I'll go with you.
McFarland has a directory of them.
Anyway, all right. Anybody else?
So just want to make sure I've got consensus. What we'll do is bring you a draft, and Council Member Schuler suggested maybe quarterly windows and then halfway into the quarter. So there'd be 45 days if council says continue. That gives April time to communicate with their security team to continue, or they would have a 45-day notice that will be the end. So if quarterly makes sense is how frequently council wants to have that agreement in front of them, we can make that happen. It should be on your next regular agenda.
Can I ask just one follow-up question? And there was the other conversation about starting the navigation for the permanent location, so we can get into that.
Absolutely.
Get out of temporary contract, get into real contract. Got it.
Now you're
Yes.
talking.
Daryl, just for clarification for the staff perspective, are you saying something coming to council for renewing?
Yeah, the existing contract changed the end dates, so in 90-day chunks to be considered every 45 days for the extension for the next 90 days.
Okay, and go to council each time.
Yeah, so once a quarter.
Once a quarter?
Yeah.
Will this renewal go on to the 28th of March?
Yes, yeah, so I'm not hearing council say we want an interruption in service between now and then, or at least we've got existing language that we can extend onto. So since we're not starting from scratch, it's a little faster. And Anthony loves to work late nights. He's really good at it. So. Thanks for being here, Anthony.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
Appreciate you. I apologize for being late. I was on VA time, so.
That's okay. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, April.
Thank you.
All right. On to item 2, discussion regarding unsolicited junk mail. Anthony,
This applause is for you.
How many times have you wrestled with unsolicited junk mail?
I mean,
This is probably the fourth.
Count that.
3 or 4 times.
It is not an easy
It's a
Wow.
circumstance.
matter of something changed. That's a matter of the First Amendment. Last time we had.
All right. Ready to get started?
Thank you, council.
all right,
Thank you.
Put it on every doorstep. Yep.
All right, so regulation of unsolicited junk mail. This is not the first time this is on the council. Background on this issue, we have had several memos they're all in your packet, or we may have missed one because there's several. But I've tried to include every single one in the packet to you guys that the city attorney's office has drafted to council. So I think this is the 7th. I'm not sure if there has been a presentation to council each and every time. I remember since I've been with the city, there's been several. The first time I remember there being one, it was when Councilmember Hall was on council. She brought in an industrial sized trash bag filled with these types of materials and set it on the table in front of us. So it has been an interesting topic to work on. But This is regarding the regulation of unsolicited written materials. Basically, types of materials this would include is, for example, a newspaper with certain advertisement material that is delivered onto the property of private residents without them opting in, right? So,
Will you please do me a favor? Will you just roll that chair back a little bit from in front, the one behind you?
oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. So I think there might be a couple ones. This could also include, for example, I don't know if they still do yellow pages. I don't remember ever seeing one. But that could be one example where they would drop that off at your house without you having to sign up for it. That was just something that was provided. So this has been an issue that council has brought up several times. What can we do about this? The main problem, as you can see, is this doesn't just end up in the laps of Norman residents, right? It also ends up in the streets of Norman, on the sidewalks, and in the storm grates, as you see here. And so we get a lot of complaints from residents about the visual blight that it causes. A lot of people are concerned because they view it as like a pollutant or a, it's in the street, it looks ugly. Like you see in the pictures here, it also can block storm grates when it makes it into that system. So, one of the potential solutions we've been discussing with council for a couple years now, there was a 2018 case out of the 6th Circuit, Lexington Fayette County government. They adopted an ordinance which prohibited unsolicited written materials to be delivered unless they were delivered in particular locations. So on the porch, securely attached to the front door, on a mail slot, between the exterior front door and an interior front door, stuff like that. Stuff where it would not likely end up as litter in the streets of Norman. The issue with that is, well, it went to the 6th Circuit, meaning it was litigated, right? However, the city in that instance did prevail, and the 6th Circuit sided with the city. Based on that, I think we finally had a way forward to propose to council, and this lets the city have a more favorable position going into some sort of adoption of a code like this. However, it is in the 6th Circuit. We are in the 10th Circuit. It is only persuasive and it's not binding, meaning that we would basically be put in the position of Lexington Fayette where this might be litigated and go to federal court if that is actually adopted, right? So, this is because there are First Amendment concerns, because this is expressive material, right? It is advertisement, but it's expressive material. And the Supreme Court historically has protected door-to-door solicitation, right? So, people coming to your door, let's say they're a religious organization and they're coming to solicit, that is protected speech, right? So cities who have tried to stop solicitors or tried to stop that type of solicitation have faced a lot of difficulty in the courts, right? Because that's protected speech. However, when it comes to this particular approach, it's been pretty easy because if you think about it, right, when you fling a newspaper or some other type of material and it lands on someone's front yard, right, they might not see it for a couple of days, right? So if it rains, if it gets washed away or blown away by our Oklahoma winds, they might not ever see that, right? If it's between their exterior front door and their interior front door, they're going to see it as soon as they walk in the front house. This type of regulation, as recognized by the 6th Circuit, makes it more likely that the person, the intended audience, sees the actual material. So it's not a burden so much on free speech. It is a burden on the company because it likely increased cost, but it's not necessarily a burden on that speech, right? So this is kind of a very attractive option. So that is kind of the way forward we presented to council the last time this issue was raised. However, the city attorney's office, due to 10th Circuit specific issues, wanted to engage in some more robust data collection regarding this particular practice. Because if we do adopt this type of ordinance, it would be very, very likely to be litigated, right? And we want to make sure that we are in the best position possible to protect ourselves if that litigation occurred, right? So we wanted to data collect on the front end so that we would have a sufficient, sufficient evidence to defend some lawsuit if that happened. Now, how we did that, and this is the kind of court case that we drew from that, but what we did since the last time we saw council, we worked with Stormwater. This is Hans Oggood from our Stormwater Department. And I called them and was like, I need your help. And they, bless their hearts, they went out. It wasn't every single day since the last time we saw you. I kind of wanted to target it so we weren't taking up too much staff time. But after particular storm events, right, where there was a lot of rain, the stormwater team who were out, I think they cleaned the grates, right?
They were street sweeping, most of them.
Street sweeping. They took photos of visible advertising materials that were on or around storm grates or in the streets. Again, we didn't do this every single day, but it was not hard to find, right? It did not take them very long. I remember the day before I last presented this to council, I took photos myself, and I just drove around on my lunch break, and I got several pictures. But we have approximately 82 photos that were taken by the stormwater team, and it's not super. I didn't put any of them in this slide except for those first two, but I mean, they're all of them in the street, on the sidewalk. A lot of them were blocking storm grates. So the inference that we can take from that, obviously, is that it is making its way into the stormwater system, which is then being distributed out, right? So it becomes a source of litter and pollution. So, and this is an actual, one of the particular advertisements that does make its way, particularly, they have, this is their advertising material for their service, and they, let's see, they deliver almost 500,000 copies of The Buyer's Edge, and it hits 97% of households in the metro. I think they deliver on a weekly basis, so they're hitting most of the residents in the metro area every single week. So this is a large volume of material that's making its way potentially into the city's infrastructure. So we're not talking about like one or two, right? We're talking about a lot of material on a yearly basis. And that is what other cities who have been successful in these types of lawsuits, we can also rely on their findings, which is very similar to our own.
How often was that? 500,000?
I think that's maybe a day or a week. So that's 500,000, but that's in the metro area. That's just not Norman. But that's, and let's see here.
Hey, Anthony,
Yeah.
are these normally delivered in the mail?
Nope.
They're actually tossed. I have never seen one like in ages.
My
I'll
understanding.
give you all you want.
No, I'm just saying I haven't seen them in ages. So
My understanding is that it is its own company, and they don't have to be subscribed to the newspaper. Even like the Oklahoman, right? That doesn't get delivered in the mail. That's usually on your driveway, right? The issue is, they're delivering to everybody, not people who pay for it, who are interested in picking that up that morning and reading it. So it lingers. I think it's a contractor basis where they pick up the newspapers and then those people are paid to deliver it, right? And they don't deliver it to your front door. They throw it out the window of their car as they drive by, typically. As you can imagine, right, if someone who orders Oklahoma and pays money for that does not receive that newspaper, they call and they want their newspaper because that's what they're paying for, right? I don't think there's necessarily that incentive here when you have a contractor who, I don't think the business model necessarily relies on the person actually reading the material, right? I don't think that's where they're generating the revenue. So that's why I think it's called the the fly and fling method is what it's called. And so it doesn't really matter where it ends up. Mm-hmm. So whether it ends up, right next to the curb, I'm sure it gets very tiring throwing all those newspapers, and so maybe they don't make them very far. A lot of them end up in the street. As you can see here, some of them either they never made it to the lawn or they ended up in the street, There's a whole lot that end up onto or next to storm grates. Here's some more, and this was after, you know, particular heavy rain, right? So there's other material there, but it adds to it. So, it's not a non-existent problem, and we were able to confirm that and gather evidence on that. We also, at that time, after the last time we saw council, we kind of took in some citizen complaints because I'm sure some of you have heard from your citizens about this issue. I know Lee Hall particularly had a lot of complaints when she was on council. But we compiled a lot of Action Center activity. There weren't a whole lot of complaints to the Action Center. And we also tried to compile emails to city staff and council. So for those of you who may not have been on council last time we saw you, or for this issue, if you could forward those complaints that you received on issues related to this, please send it to the city attorney's office so we could add it to that file. But, you know, that being said, last time I saw council, I was able to do some social media research. There was some Nextdoor posts on that issue that got a lot of attention. I believe at one time there was a Norman-specific website dedicated to this issue, which was kind of extreme in my opinion. But we all know how citizens, they have, you know, some things that they're very, very passionate about. I think this might be one of them. And so I couldn't find that. I really wish I could have found it so I could bring that to your attention. But so we have some complaints. They're not as significant, I think, as the photographic evidence. So based on that, I think we have enough evidence to go forward, I think, with drafting an ordinance if that is what council wants. I would just prepare council that this is something that will very, very likely be litigated because, you know, that's a lot of papers being delivered to the metro area and a lot in it, you know, on a regular course, right? So if this is something that Norman does, it might be something that other cities do, so it might be in the best interest of that company to litigate it, as we saw in other circuits. So just be aware of the risk, right? And just because, you know, Lexington won in the 6th Circuit does not mean we will win in the 10th Circuit. So be prepared to litigate the issue if that is an action that council wants to go.
What about, would it be too burdensome to create a permitting process? We have permitting processes for a yard sale. So if you had made them do a permitting process, you can say you can have this for 72 hours or whatever, and it costs you $25. Might eliminate a lot of them. If you don't, if you're caught doing it without that permit, oh, it's a $100 fine.
Because the evidence is in your driveway.
Yes. And I mean, is that too burdensome? Because
My concern would be, would that actually fix the problem? Because you're not changing how it's not necessarily that the information being delivered is the problem, it's how it is being delivered. So I don't think a permit process would necessarily fix the fly and fling method, right? Which is the main concern.
if it would, if you caught them doing it and popped them with $100 every time,
Well-
if they didn't have a permit.
Well, we could only pop them with a $100 fine amount if we regulate how they distribute the material,
Yeah.
which is what this is suggesting. So could an enforcement scheme like that help with enforcement? Yes. However, litigation will likely occur before any enforcement action ever takes place, right? So, I think enforcement is a big concern because I think, I presented the difficulty of, how are we going to catch people in the actual act to give them a citation, right? That's going to be difficult. And then I think a council member and then mayor, I think they volunteered to do a stakeout, which is possible, but time consuming. So enforcement is a concern, but it will likely be litigated before any enforcement would happen. So, but that is a thing that might help.
I don't know who's.
I was.
Go ahead, Mayor.
One of the things that concerns me if we took action against that is all of us have used political
Yep.
advertisements that we're putting in, same, to me, it seems like the same idea. There's no sanctity to political advertisements.
Yeah,
And we're putting them unsolicited on people's doors, so we have to be very careful in what we're doing. The second question is, how good is the argument that is actually polluting to be able to do it? I can see with the colored ink, I can see all those things, but is that a strong enough legal argument to help us? I've been a sweeper driver. I understand what Hans is doing.
it comes in is not biodegradable.
Yeah. And even if it is biodegradable, it's still making its way into the stormwater system. And just because something's biodegradable doesn't mean it's favorable for that.
No.
You know, and pollution doesn't necessarily mean that you're like threatening an environmental species or something like that. It's, you know, you can prevent it regardless of how detrimental it is. You can easily prevent it from going into that system. To answer your first question, right, this doesn't matter about the content of what is being distributed, it's how it is distributed. So we're not saying you can't solicit material without someone accepting it beforehand. We're saying if you do this, you have to leave it on someone's door. You have to leave it in their mail slot, or personally with the owner and occupant, right? It's not limiting door-to-door solicitation. It's limiting how you do it so it doesn't detrimentally impact the residents that you're trying to reach. So
You ought to try putting a door card on in the high wind.
But what he's saying is that if you place it on the door, then you've met the burden
Yeah.
of what you need to do, the responsibilities.
And it could be possible that even a door mailer could end up in the city's stormwater system. And it's not about harm elimination, it's about harm reduction, right? Because it's very easy to see the impact that this kind of delivery service has on the city. And it's not about eliminating it, it's about reducing it in a way that's not overly burdensome on speech. So,
For sure.
Do you have, I mean, so
I got you.
obviously we've been thinking about this for a while now. Do you have any verbiage that you can share with council? And how would you propose we move forward? And how it would be written for us to present and have that first discussion and conversation?
absolutely. And what I can do is, I've printed out the, I would just share with you the other ordinances that the other, I think there are two municipalities that have adopted ordinances like this. It's, and I can share that with you, because I would want ours to be as closely mirrored to those as possible, because those have already been litigated and we have the best, mirroring it to that would predict our outcome in court.
Exactly.
Right, so,
So in your opinion, you think if we mirrored that and keep it strictly off the First Amendment and keep it strictly focused on the ordinance of delivery, it should pass muster in the courts?
and keep in mind, it's still a First Amendment issue, right? We just are treated a little bit more favorably in the courts, right? So, it's still a First Amendment analysis, but we are, setting ourselves up to have a better outcome, right? Because I don't want to get too much into First Amendment precedents, but basically, since it's content neutral, right, we are held to a lower standard in the courts, right?
Time, place, and manner.
And so, because we are regulating the time, place, and manner of distribution of speech, right, we are not going to be held to like a strict scrutiny standard or anything like that. And so, we just have to show like a narrowly tailored, it's narrowly tailored to a legitimate governmental interest, right? And we can rely on the other case law that is similar to the circumstance to prove our case.
I'm all for it. I like the idea. I get complaints too, but you know, in Ward 5, we don't see much of the junk mail out there. So it'd be in your all's ward. But the 10% of Ward 5 is urban, that it would affect it. So I'm for this. I think we should go forward and see what we can do. I think this is something that the citizens are asking for, and it's worthwhile to pursue.
It was in Ward 4 that I always had trouble because of the leaves, tree detritus. I mean, it's just natural stuff that comes down, but then you get the stinking papers and the 12-pack beer tops. Yeah, you gotta get
That's
out.
something you see in the country, and you see in Ward 4? Must be near the university, right?
Yeah, well, that's.
Councilmember Grant.
Yeah, I wanted to move forward with that. Also, I was gonna say those plastic bags put microplastics in our water. So definitely don't see it as harmless. Also, so is it like would we get a study session and then a first and second reading?
So I'm not sure, but if we go forward with an ordinance amendment, we would likely come to a committee. I don't know what committee it would be on, but it would be just like any other ordinance change. It would be similar to this, except we'd be going over the specifics of
We
the
propose
ordinance.
to bring it back to this committee. We'll just have Brenda calendar it based on Anthony's anticipated first draft availability, get that back before you, and if it meets this committee's approval, we can go study session, first reading, second reading, and go.
Let's do that.
Go for it.
Councilman Homer?
Hans, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that most of the times in the 24 and a half years I've been here, they don't blanket the entire city at one time. They do like a ward. So they'll do like Ward 3. And we'll get the complaints, we'll go out there, we'll sweep the entire city. But when we make the rounds, sometimes they hit it after we've been there. So we get an entire ward cleaned up of leaves and everything, and they come back and throw their papers. And then the next rain, that directly contributes to those grates getting clogged up as soon as it hits it. And I mean, we get phone calls repeating, hey, my grate's out here clogged up. I knew it was clean last week, but they've thrown the paper, it's collected all the leaves, and it directly correlates to places getting flooded and intersections getting flooded, so.
That's what I was gonna say too. What about like empty properties where nobody's there and they're getting these?
So, in
12
another,
of them in there.
so another thing, when they argued in the Sixth Circuit, that was an alternative that they argued, because right now, they do have a service you can call. I don't know how you'd find the number, but you could call a number and you could opt out. I don't know how well that works. I don't think it would work very well from what I heard from resident complaints.
In this day and age, I don't understand this business model at all. Who is giving money to advertising that? Because who opens it and who looks at it? All I do is like, trash.
They're paying for the advertising space.
Well,
That's what I'm saying, but who's advertising there? Because nobody's looking at that advertisement
It's
hardly at all.
just
They-
their way of making money. I mean,
They
it's
sell the ad space by saying we have 500,000 in
Distribution.
circulation.
I could just say, hey, I'm gonna drive around the metro area. I've got circulation of 500,000. Give me something to
Yep.
give me money. I'm gonna.
That's why I don't get it, and
That's what's
I believe it. If I felt that there was more, like, man, it's a legitimate business at what they're doing out here.
Yeah.
I think they're fleecing people. Like, hey, it is. Look at this big. It probably cost them nothing to advertise in there, very little for as much as circulation as it does get. But I just can't see it as being an effective tool, and it's when it's just wasting and causing us problems, and it's just everybody thinks it's garbage. So it's like litter. They're throwing litter out. That's the way I see it.
Have you discussed this with other cities' attorneys in the metro or their offices?
I have not. And
I figure they would all be
Some
very
of
interested
them-
in that, probably.
maybe, or some of them rather me not ask them questions about it in case it comes to them. But I have not. I think when I first worked on this issue, I may have reached out to someone in Lexington, Fayette. But that would be the
I
extent
feel
of
like
it.
other council members around the metro have probably all gotten the same complaint.
I will bring the issue to the next meeting of the metro area city managers and just ask them, and if Anthony's got a draft in time, I'll bring it and say, here's what we're talking about. If you guys have interest, let us know, because, yeah, I think if everybody recognizes we're all moving together, there's definitely comfort in that. And Anthony, I had a guy I went to high school with. He was a very entrepreneurial guy. He created one of those types of newspapers. It was called the Thrifty Nickel.
Yes.
And everybody advertised in it. And how they distributed them, they put up these plastic boxes at every store all over town. They stayed in there with the lid closed so the wind didn't blow them all out. I don't know if that was mandated by the cities or if they just recognized that
is
was
a
the
perfect
best
solution.
value. But I don't know if that's time, place, and manner. If you're going to do that kind of advertising, you have to put it in these boxes at stores, and people take them if they want them.
No, because I think door-to-door advertisement and solicitation is so protected by the courts. That form of speech, in and of itself, is pretty protected.
You can't, okay.
I don't.
How can we regulate their packaging? That's how you do it. You say it has to be this specific kind of packaging if it's gonna be left on organic material or whatever, like lawns. It can be a packaging that can make it so expensive for them that it is not worth it, and that will hold muster because you can bring in environmental stuff. There are ways around this. How do you think the government does it all the time to us? And I'm just saying, and when it's trash like this, I'm all about free speech because, like you said, we have to go. We solicit doors, we knock doors and leave hangers, and there's people. I don't want to cut people out of business, but this is not one of them. This is garbage, in my opinion, litter, it winds up in our trash and our water, and if it looks like trash, it might be trash. That's all.
A lot of folks will say that about political advertising.
That's true, too.
Careful, so
Yeah.
double-edged sword, Kelly.
Council, we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Let them all know we might be litigating this.
Yep.
Just don't take your
Yeah,
opponent's
might
stuff.
need amicus briefs and.
Yeah,
kinds of-
yeah.
That's
Other
a-
cities can tell us. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Problem here too.
Okay, I will.
Thanks, sir.
I used to be a Blue Thumb volunteer. I cleaned thousands of these buyer's guides out of the storm drains and the creeks. They are pollution.
It is.
Trust me.
I
Yeah, they get
agree.
nasty 3 days after.
Well, it dissolves and it pollutes.